Hello, I'm going to speak mostly in Lenape today. It's the Unami dialect, and I'll translate as I go. So that's the language that you're hearing. I'm part of a cultural revitalization, and part of that for the Lenape Nation is to bring our language back into use. So we have classes and things that we're doing to help us to learn the language, and they want us to practice it as much as possible. So you get to be my guinea pigs today. So thank you so much. Ni pai nening, na wahiki yanguing ne kodnashoni. Apuak ne kenakehike. Kahesana haki, na bi, na lecheon, nek mehamichingi awenik, na bisuna, nek aesesak na haki. I thank Mother Earth for all that she gives us. Nek hodnashoni wilanak suak, kaname wakehena na wikihena yushiki haking. Kamil kananak nek hodnashoni, kiluna kaname waken, Keluna Walatana Mewakan, or Keluna Ahotawakan. I thank the Haudenosaunee for the beautiful care they have always taken of this land, and I sent them our love. Yuhaki Pilsu, Yuki Haudenosaunee Wikuwak, Patamauk, Lesin Lakeokan, Ok Pemetun Heok, Nauk Lik Sawakana, Utalitelent Haki Katanel Kuyakui. I said that I acknowledge that the Haudenosaunee have lived on this land 10,000 years or more, living their lives. Wemia wen tapu Haudenosaunee katapuchena kamachik utali, kamachik takau koeok haking, kamachik mweshata meneo kishalamukong hatuna utali. I said the rest of us who are not Haudenosaunee are visitors here. And as visitors on this land, we need to walk softly upon it, and that we should remember that it is Creator who put the Haudenosaunee at this location. This is their territory. Enda lenapeike leche leche ukan, kenaki hehena, kemeshala wananak, kemak halamana wananak, nekhoneshaunee, nekikayu yamaninga, okishalamukong. I've asked us to take a moment of silent prayer, which is the Lenape way of remembering and honoring. And we're going to remember the Haudenosaunee, the ancestors, and of course, Creator. So a moment of silent prayer, please. Kua hawananak yuki Haudenosaunee netamiawenik haking wina weok nauk lepweokan katachana nauk kekule kamilawana enda wina weokti kipelachana kahesana haki ok ketelewehana ahikta kwetkihana nauk haki. I said that we can show respect to the Haudenosaunee by respecting their wisdom, attending their events when invited, donating when asked, taking care of Mother Earth, and most especially saying yes to returning their lands, especially their sacred lands, burial sites, and the territories that they need. We should also remember the children who are being found on the boarding school sites, like the Carlisle School. Their little bodies are demanding that they be returned to their nations. And we need to encourage all the religions that were a part of that to help in this process and return their bodies so that their spirits can rest with their nations and their families. Maya Iksuach. Now our minds are one. Nanelekech. I've spoken.
Now our minds are one. Thank you, Roberta. Thanks very much during this Indigenous Peoples Month. Let's begin with introducing ourselves, and just this time we have a bit of a change. Instead of answering an unended question, because we'll save that for our small group conversation. Let's simply give our name and congregation so that we can hear from Joe Fleming fast, soon. Duncan, would you begin?
Sure. I'm Duncan Harris in my faith community, St. Joseph's Church here in Penfield.
Thank you. Peter.
I'm Peter Stein. I'm at Temple B'rith Kodesh in Brighton, and also involved with the Rochester Board of Rabbis as their president.
Thank you. And Roberta.
Okay.
I'm here as part of Rockettes.
Thank you, Roberta. And Pastor Allen.
Yes, I'm Alan Daly. I am the interim pastor at John Knox Presbyterian Church out in Greece. I'm also here on behalf of GRCC and also on behalf of RockX, as I've recently accepted the nomination to become their treasurer. So, but there's no questions for any of that for me right now. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. And Joe, I want to introduce Alan as that GRCC stands for Greater Rochester Community of Churches. Ted, would you introduce yourself?
Ted Polano at Third Presbyterian.
Thank you. David?
Hi, Deacon Dave Palma from the Southeast Rochester Catholic Community, which is St. Mary's downtown, Blessed Sacrament, and St. Boniface.
Thanks, David. Pastor Doug?
I'm Doug Stewart, pastor of Incarnate Word Lutheran Church here in the city.
Thank you. Rebecca?
Rebecca Seegers, another pastor at Third Presbyterian.
Thank you. Barbara?
Barbara Green, member of the Church of the Assumption, member of Rocky X.
Thank you. And Debbie?
Good morning. Is there a question we're answering?
You just give us your congregation.
Oh, I'm here representing the Rochester Baha'i community.
Thank you.
Yes.
Harry?
Hi, everyone.
Hi. Barry, would you introduce yourself and congregation? You're muted. Barry, you're muted. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm just waiting for the guy to turn my heat back on.
Oh dear. Listen layers.
Okay. I am Barry Swan. I am the Madrich of Beth Haskalah, which is the Rochester Society for Humanistic Judaism. I'm also the president of the Interfaith Alliance of Rochester, and we'll have an announcement about that later in the Zoom call. Thank you.
Thank you. Ted?
Me? Yeah, Ted at Third Presbyterian.
Thank you. Who have I overlooked? Did I miss anyone? Okay. We have introduced ourselves to one another. Of course, most of us know one another, and I'm so glad to get together again. And I wonder if Rabbi Stein would lead us in prayer.
Thanks, Danny. Once again, it's good to be together with all of you, and I'm honored to offer a moment of prayer as we begin our conversation today. Eternal God, source of blessing, I open my heart to you in this moment. I pray to you that we will be blessed today with wisdom, with courage, and with insight. Eternal God, open us up to the needs of our community, to those who are vulnerable, those who are afraid, those who are suffering and struggling in every way. Eternal God, I pray to you for those who find violence in their daily lives and in their homes, that they may be healed and find peace. I pray to you for those who lie in hospital beds and who reside in care facilities, along with those who work there, those who are caregivers and provide the needed care for those who are sick, who are struggling. I pray to you today for those who are facing discrimination, whose voting rights are being threatened, who face racism and sexism and discrimination in all forms. I pray for the people in Ukraine, that they will find peace in the days to come, and those refugees from that country will find the blessing of support and all that they need to restore security to their lives. Eternal source of healing, bless our broken community in this time. Bring us to a place where our community will become whole, will become peaceful, will become filled with blessing, will be filled with all good things. And bless us with the knowledge, the insight, the wisdom, the strength, the courage, and the patience to make all of these good things come to be. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Rabbi Stein. I think you clicked all of our concerns. And now we have an answer to this prayer. Joe Fleming is with us. Our overarching umbrella organization is Faith in Action. And Joe is Faith in Action Senior Advisor, although he doesn't look it. Faith Leadership Strategies. Thank you for being with us, Joe. Very good to have you with us.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Denny. Thank you. And good morning, everybody. Yeah, so I come out of an experience, just a brief word about me. I organized in the city of Camden, New Jersey, with Camden Congregations Organized for People for about 17 years. And then we grew that city-based organization into a statewide network, which is still operating powerfully, Faith in New Jersey. So along the way, I had the opportunity to also help to build our organizing federation in Philadelphia and another in New York, Faith in New York, and in Pennsylvania, the organization is called Power. So I come out of an experience of organizing. I'm a lay person. I'm a lay Catholic faith leader, and but I have had the opportunity to work with faith leaders across the country for 20 some years now. And it gives me great joy to be with you because part of what we do with our Faith Leadership Strategies Department is to support the organizing and formation of faith leaders. And it feeds my spirit to be with you this morning. So what I'm hoping we might do is to, in our short time together, think a little bit together about how faith-rooted community organizing is situated within a whole body of ways in which faith communities and other groups can respond to pressures that families are dealing with. Also want to walk through the Faith in Action organizing model, so you have a feel for that if it is new to you. And I want to integrate within that a story of organizing that I was part of in the city of Camden to help bring to life some of what we're talking about. Then we'll have some time for Q&A. Does that sound okay? Great. So I want to begin with this image. So we begin with families here in the center, families who are under pressure, trying to navigate a whole series of economic pressures, unemployment, poverty, social pressures, political pressures, the experience of racism, experience of anti-Semitism, experience of anti-Muslim, anti-Asian hate, political exclusion as well. And so we have families and individuals who are in pain and are looking for support. And so historically, faith communities and other value-inspired groups have at their disposal two forms of response. And one is direct service, charity, and the provision of food and shelter and financial support, healthcare for folks who are in need. And it's a very immediate need that folks are feeling when they show up, knocking on the door, asking for help. So it makes sense that faith communities are ready to respond to meet those needs and to alleviate some of the suffering that folks are experiencing. So this is all happening down here, kind of supporting families as they make their way through some of these pressures and ordeals that they're experiencing. And then another form of response is a justice response, a systems change response, which asks the question, why are so many families experiencing these kinds of pressures? How is inequity kind of built into the systems and structures that are operating within our governments at the local, state, and federal level, and within our economic blueprints as well, in terms of how corporations are treating employees and communities. So two important responses, two complementary responses. I'm not suggesting that one is more important than the other, but I see them as most faith traditions do as going hand in hand. But I did want to ask you, if you could work with me here, as to which of these responses, which of these modes of response is more common in your experience, the direct service or the system change response? And this is where you begin to participate with, I'm teasing. Anybody have a thought on this? Which is more common in your experience? Rebecca, do you want to speak to that? Here's my question, Rebecca. You said direct service. Is that the feeling of most folks?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
Yes.
here's the question. Why do you think that is?
More immediate.
Somebody shows up, they need help right now. Of course, you're going to want to respond.
And it's a basic tenet of all of our faiths to be charitable and
Hospitality.
to provide direct service.
But it's also easier. The structures are more invisible and more challenging to both identify and to dismantle.
Yeah.
Yes. So it is harder. Let's talk a little bit more about that. It's hard it feels complicated. As you say, the blueprints are kind of operating in the background and they're not necessarily evident to us as to, okay, this is what we have to do. And we do this and we get this response and then we'll have the impact that we want. So it can be a little bit complex. Other reasons why it's not as common?
It's a rare leader who is such a good leader as to be prophetic and help us know that we need to analyze the structures and the systems. Most of us, most of humanity is blissfully unaware that there are inadequate, unjust systems and policies and procedures. We think if it's institutionalized, it must be okay. Well, let's follow that without even giving a thought to how it better change in order to provide for the common good of humanity.
Yeah, yeah. Barbara, thank you, Denny. Barbara, could you speak to your comment that it's less controversial to focus on direct service rather than systems change?
I think most people, not all though, which is kind of disturbing, but most people would be supportive of direct service and understand it and be willing to participate in it. Those who are informed and not quite sure of how they want to be perceived publicly based on family response and all of that, it could be problematic and controversial to get involved in the social justice aspect of it.
Yeah.
I would add to that. I agree with that. But for me, there's always been a nuance, which is this what our religious institution is really all about? And there's pretty much universal agreement that if we can provide direct service as a religious institution, if we can cook that pot of stew, or if we can collect the mittens in the wintertime or whatever, there's pretty universal agreement that that's part of our purpose. when you get into that realm of advocacy, especially when it gets to direct involvement with legislation and things like that, there's a segment of people, not me personally, but there's a segment of people who say, no, that's not what we're for. That should happen in other places. And a piece of that is, I think, very directly in terms of what are the sources of authority we draw upon. And if we're scripture-based, it's much more delicate to say we should advocate for or against a particular law because of a verse of scripture, as opposed to drawing on other sources. So I appreciate Barbara's comment very much, and just wanted to add my own nuance to it.
Yeah, that's really helpful, Rabbi Peter. Thank you. And thank you, Barbara. Yeah, I think all of what you shared resonates with me and my own experience. And I think there's also been a conscious, intentional effort to marginalize faith communities' participation in public life, political life, through the use of the word politics. That's politics. And somehow that has been, that's become a way to diminish participation outside the four walls of the faith congregation. And you add on top of that the polarization that's been rampant within our communities over the past decade. And it gets harder to move with clarity and with unity. And so it takes real work to ground this work for justice in the particular faith tradition so that folks can make the connection. And I think that's a really critical role that faith leaders play within this work, is to make that interpretation. Yeah, that's right, Rabbi Stein. Okay, so clearly faith-rooted community organizing is a justice response that can complement other efforts that are underway within the faith community. So I'm going to move quickly into a conversation about the Faith in Action's take on the cycle of organizing, our organizing process. And here's where I'm going to try the back and forth, and you can tell me at the end if it was successful, weaving in a story of organizing as we walk through this diagram. So the first step of an organizing process, the theological term that we use is encounter, but it is the work of building relationships, of connecting with members of the community within a congregation, within an organization, and within the broader community. And it's intentional work that takes place in order to create a season of outreach, to gather up the stories of all of those families kind of in the middle of that diagram that I shared previously, and to ask them what is your experience, and what are your hopes, what are your struggles right now, what are your aspirations, and what would you like to see change about the community. So it is the building, the strengthening of a network of relationships that becomes the foundation of community-based power. So families knit together through these relationships can move together in the public sphere, public arena, to call for change. So part of what this is about is building power, but I don't want to skip over just the important spiritual dimension of this, which is to help people realize that I am not alone, that this is not somehow whatever I'm experiencing is not my fault and is not unique to me. It's not due to some deficiency that I have in my personhood, but there's something larger happening that's affecting not only me, my family, but my neighbor and a numbers of folks throughout our community. So that, I think, is an important gift that we bring through our outreach. And I think sometimes this outreach gets perceived as an imposition on folks. We call these conversations one-to-ones. They're not, in my experience, they are a gift. They're not an imposition. If somebody
Mm.
It's not a good time for somebody, they're going to tell me that. But if I can get them into a conversation about what they're experiencing, nobody else is coming around asking, how are you doing? The mayor's office is not doing that in any kind of authentic way, typically. So we are bringing a gift of just giving people a sounding board and the opportunity to process, make meaning out of some of their experiences. One of the reasons we do this outreach is to identify new leaders. And I want to underscore that. You know, in organizing, you can start off with a small group of committed people, but if you're not extending, reaching out, recruiting, bringing in new people and creating opportunities for them to exercise their leadership, then the group just kind of atrophies over time and you don't have the staying power to make the kind of change that you seek to make. So I want to emphasize one thing additionally. This process is embedded within organizing teams that are anchored within faith communities or other organizations or community groups. So it's not just a team of people, concerned citizens, or committed faith leaders getting together up here, kind of strategizing and determining what issues we're going to work on, but it goes deeply into congregations and communities and lives there. I think that's really the thing I'd want to drive home in this part of the conversation. So I'm going to continue by telling an organizing story from Camden, New Jersey. And this was Camden in the late 1990s. This was Lawyers Row, they called it back in the day, where all the wealthy folks, professionals in North Camden lived. But by the late 1990s, it was really a scene of a lot of blight and devastation. So Camden at that time was 84,000 people, high concentration of Black and brown folks, the suburbs all around being predominantly white. And our local federation in Camden was 18 congregations working together from different faith traditions, multiracial organization. And we had about 60 core leaders who were kind of driving the bus at that point in time. And so they made a commitment to do this first step of relational outreach. And that team of 60 brought in some others as well, but they did 600 one-to-one conversations with folks in their congregations and neighborhoods. And they heard a whole range of concerns that focused on crime, violence, abandoned buildings, concerns about youth, concerns about just the level of fear that parents had in seeing their children go off to school and wondering if they would return safely or not at the end of the day. So we did that period of investment in relationships and felt like we had a good handle on kind of where folks in the community were at that point in time. And as I say, we were bringing in new leaders as well. And we were planting seeds of hope and possibility. Maybe together we can do something. So that was the first step, this first step of encounter and relational outreach. The second step then we moved into, which was that of disruption. You know, you listen to lots and lots of stories from folks about what they're dealing with and the level of pain that they're experiencing, their unrealized hope, and it stirs something deeply within you. And it calls forth resonance. If you share that experience directly and feel the same pain, it might also call for some resonance if you can relate to that experience through some similar experiences that you've had, or maybe similar experiences of feeling powerless in your own life. So that disruption around why does this injustice exist? Why is there so much disparity across race in terms of the experiences that families have? And as a person of faith, how am I called to respond to this? What is expected of me? So that's the internal disruption that happens. And there's also a form of disruption which is more external as we move out to to engage a whole set of conversations, what we call research meetings, with people in public life. It might be elected officials, it might be other nonprofit organizations, it might be educational, some policy experts that we begin to meet with to try to understand why does this injustice exist right now. So in Camden, we began to do a whole set of, we did about 40 research meetings over the course of 3 months. So it was really helpful to have a team of 60 people who could kind of divide and conquer, right? They would bring folks from their own congregation along with them to cover, we'll cover this meeting. We'll cover the meeting with the chief of police. We've got the meeting with the head of the county freeholder board, et cetera. And we were asking a set of questions. Is there a link between all of the vacant buildings and crime, violence? Why are there so many vacant buildings? In the neighboring communities, there aren't vacant buildings. What's peculiar or particular to Camden that we have this situation happening? What's supposed to happen? What's actually happening? What are the contradictions between what's supposed to happen and what is happening? Who's benefiting? Who profits off of this? Politically, who relates to whom? Who's got the power to do something about it? Are there already plans in motion to deal with the violence and abandoned buildings in the city? And part of what we were trying to do at this phase was to move from a problem. In Camden, the problem that we had identified was blight and violence. And the problem with problems is that they're too big to resolve. And it's hard to kind of get your arms around them. A problem like poverty, a problem like hunger, you have to break it down into something smaller, more kind of bite-sized chunks in order to identify a solution and a response. So the problems were violence and vacant buildings, and we were trying to get to something more specific that would help us to respond at a systemic level. And through all of these research meetings, we did in fact identify systemic failures, which I'll get into in a second. We worked with Rutgers University to map out where all of the vacant buildings in the city were at that time, and where all of the violent crimes that had happened. The police department gave us this data over the previous 3 years. And so we were trying to make the case that there is a correlation between the vacant buildings and violent crime. And so by extension, where neighborhoods have lots of vacant buildings, and there's going to be more crime. And Rutgers helped us to document that that was in fact the case. So through all of this outreach, we learned that 1 in 8 buildings in the city was abandoned, 1 in 8. And then we saw that there is a link between the vacants and violent crime. We learned from the mayor that he didn't see, he saw crime as a policing issue, not a problem that city agencies, other city departments needed to resolve. He didn't think housing was a serious issue. And we learned from state officials that they did not trust city officials at all, and were leery of putting public dollars into the hands of city officials. Partly, I think there was some implicit bias going on there. I think it's also true. 3 of the previous 5 mayors had been indicted and gone to prison for various forms of fraud and corruption. So there was also some legitimacy to some of the hesitation. And we learned that nothing was really being planned to deal with all the vacant buildings. And we learned that Camden has a great network of nonprofit community housing groups that would be willing allies in all of this and could help to turn some of the vacant buildings into properties for families, into homes for families. So that was our disruption phase. And then we moved to trying to reimagine. Reimagining is to kind of take all that you've learned through your research and to process it, to make sense of it, and to begin to tell a new story of why things are the way they are and what it would take to change direction, to get different outcomes for families and communities. And so, the story in Camden at that point was, yeah, I mean, of course, there's vacant buildings in the city of Camden, deindustrialization, loss of manufacturing jobs, white flight, the city has shrunk. But there was a lot more going on that was happening at a structural level that was really helping to create the problem and not doing anything to respond. And so we began to think, okay, so how do we take all that we learned and turn it into a strategy that we can use to have some impact? So people were really upset about the lack of thought that was going on among public officials about this particular crisis in the city. And we had to develop some strategy. How are we going to create a different dynamic in which these officials will come to the table, even given their distrust of one another, so that we can get some work done? And Marshall Gans has a really nice way of talking about strategy, which is it's a question of how do we take what we have and turn it into what we need to get what we want. And that was the question that we were asking ourselves. And what we realized is that we had strong networks in the community that we could pull on to mobilize. We had compelling testimonies from families who lived next to vacant buildings, who saw violence happening around them, who had lost loved ones to some of that violence, and who saw open air drug dealing taking place in the vacant properties next to them, who had lost their homes because of fires that took place that were started in some of the vacant buildings. And so we had powerful stories to share. What we needed was a new sense of urgency and public will to do something about this, and new resources and new systems to coordinate those resources in a way that would have more impact. So what we decided that we wanted was a task force with federal, state, county, city officials, and community leaders at the table, that we would meet monthly to essentially have a problem-solving session, to move a campaign forward, to identify vacant buildings, to get them boarded up, to get them torn down if needed, to get them rehabbed, and to get families into as many properties as possible. And we determined that the only way we could do that, given the lack of trust, was to actually have two of our faith leaders chair those monthly meetings. So that was our plan, that was our strategy. And then we kind of arrived at the moment of truth, of prophetic action. So how do we take our idea and get it implemented publicly? How do we get the commitments that we need to put this plan into action? And so we call it a public confrontation, where those with the power to resolve the issue are brought to the table with ideally hundreds of people, thousands of people in the room, where powerful stories are shared with them as to why this demands attention. Powerful stories are shared to bring the issue alive for the media and for the public officials, and then to get commitments to put a plan in place. So in Camden, we turned out 800 people for a meeting with the mayor, had lots of media there. We had very powerful testimony from 3 faith community leaders who talked about how the plague of crime and violence, vacant buildings, had impacted them and their families. We presented our research from Rutgers, and we presented our recommendation to public officials. By the end, the mayor agreed to the idea of the task force and to host those meetings in City Hall once a month. The next day, a series was launched in the local newspaper about the plague of vacant buildings in the city and the link to violent crime. They included shots of the maps that we had developed with Rutgers University, and our housing campaign was underway. So the next step is follow-up. for us, it was all of these meetings, the monthly meetings with all of the officials, and through the course of each month, staying on top of them, making sure that commitments that were made were being followed through on. So the fire department in the first meeting said, we will go out and assess every vacant building in the city and determine if it can be boarded up, if it can be, if it needs to be torn down, or if it can be rehabbed in the short term. And we had housing officials there who were prepared to take action to move on those recommendations on the fire department's assessment. We had rectors there again who were willing to continue to map and on an ongoing basis the status of the work with all of these vacant buildings. We had the police department there. We had county and state officials there making commitments of millions of dollars to help to seal up and rehab and tear down the buildings that needed to be addressed. So what our leaders learned was a lot as they reflected on what they had done well and what they could improve upon next time, and how their own experiences of power had shifted through this experience of powerful organizing. So we had dozens of new leaders emerge in Camden from this organizing process. We came out stronger than when we went in. So it was not the war of attrition that advocacy campaigns can sometimes become, where you look around and half of the folks who started out with you are no longer there. But the campaign really positioned our organization powerfully in our environment. So we had officials now coming to us asking questions about other issues, other concerns that they had, and wanted some support on. And I think we created some trust there. We were the kind of honest brokers that could bring together these various levels of government and to create the accountability that would allow the work to move forward and not to be to have funds siphoned off. And I think on this level of leadership development, we had a whole group of folks and really a whole generation, the children of all of our leaders, seeing their parents acting in these powerful ways publicly, and taking inspiration from them as role models. So just to finish up, over 3 years, we were able to get 500 properties sealed up and 2,000 properties demolished and 300 buildings rehabbed with our partners in the nonprofit housing world. So we really transformed communities across the city. And we saw a pretty dramatic impact on violence across the city as well. And so we saw overall an 8% decrease in crime. We saw a huge drop in open air drug dealing. And in areas that had a higher concentration of vacant buildings, we saw a larger decline in the level of open air drug dealing. So I will stop there. I know I just went through a lot. I hope the dynamic of presenting the steps with an illustration along the way was effective. You can tell me afterwards if that's effective, as opposed to presenting the model and then telling the story. I find that I lose people halfway through the model if I don't tell the story. So I'm curious, how is this hitting you? What's challenging about it? What's hopeful about it? Denny, we're going to stay in the large group. Duncan and I resolved. So let's stay together. And I'm open to questions and reactions that you might have.
Can you tell us a little bit about how you got some of the public officials involved? I think one of the barriers we see is trying to create momentum that way. Often the faith communities and the people that are affected, there's interest, but it's hard to bring the community into that, the government.
So two parts to that, I think. One is we did research meetings. So we went out to them and engaged them both to share the concerns from the community about this issue area and to elicit from them, what's your best thinking as to how to respond. We were not there trying to cut deals and like problem solve the situation, but we were there to gather as much information as we could and to demonstrate to them that we were connected. Our faith leaders were connected to a whole network of people in the community on whose part our faith leaders were showing up to have this research conversation. And implied within that was, you know, we're prepared to hold your feet to the fire if needed. So we began by building a public relationship with that public official, introducing ourselves and the organization to them, asking for their best thinking, their assessment. If money wasn't an issue, what would you do? And we found that could get the wheels turning a little bit in their minds. And in unguarded moments, they could actually let their imaginations run a little bit, run free. The second way that we got them to the table was to turn out 800 people. So they knew that if they were going to drag their feet, that we had the capacity, because we had just demonstrated it, to mobilize large numbers of people to call them to account as well. So.
No, that was helpful. Thanks.
Thank you. I think I want to add one editorial comment. I have worked with faith communities, faith leaders in different cities who bring in, I'm not suggesting this is your orientation, but I want to make a point that it's enough. They bring an orientation that suggests or that's grounded in the notion that we all want the same thing. Public officials, community folks. So really, it's just a matter of getting everybody to the table, and we'll talk it through. We'll kind of brainstorm, and we'll come up with the solution. And everyone's acting out of good faith, and out of a sense of the common good, if you will. And in reality, the blueprints in our communities are designed in such a way that there's an intention behind them, an intention to exclude whole sets of people and to advantage others. And it's not easy to rework those blueprints because there are interest groups who are prepared to defend the existing design. And it's not enough to get everybody in the room. You have to demonstrate that you can mobilize large numbers of people and that there will be consequences in terms of public reputation, in terms of political aspirations, if they do not come to the table in good faith, prepared to do some actual work to change things. That's my editorial comment. Carlos, did you have a comment or a question?
I have a question. What was the makeup of the community? I missed the first 20 minutes. I'm sorry. So I don't know if you described that to us, but when it comes to Latinos, whites, and blacks, and what was the total population in that area that you targeted?
I'm going to show you real quick. So this was the makeup, Carlos. Are you able to see the screen? City of about 84,000 people, and Black and brown folks making up the great majority of residents. And we were working with 18 congregations in the city. The area around the city is predominantly white. And so there was a political dynamic in which resources in the county would be directed towards suburban communities and the city and state resources as well. And the city would be starved of resources. And then there'd be kind of an end of the year process in which cities across the state, the most impoverished cities, would be doled out a chunk of money that would fall far short of what was needed out of a special pot of funds that the state had set up. So incredibly unjust system of allotting public resources. Did that answer your question, or did you have a follow-up?
No, that was it. Thank you. Thank you very much.
I guess I'll ask another question too. Can you talk about, you've got 800 people to show up. I'm guessing you were using some of the religious communities and churches, but can you talk a little bit about that?
Thank you, Duncan. Yeah, this goes back to the point I was making at the start, that we had organizing teams in these 18 congregations, and these organizing teams in each of these 18 congregations. And each of those teams consisted of 5 to 7 to 12 to 20 people who not only met, but connected with folks from across that, from their particular faith community or institution, and with neighbors in the community as well. And so that's how we mobilized, was we would ask, we'd have a citywide leadership meeting and ask representatives from each of the 18 teams, how many people can you turn out for this action coming up in May? And they would each give a number from 200 to 500 to smaller numbers. We had actions with as many as 2,000 people around other issues. And again, Camden, we're talking 80,000 people, so a small city. And this was a very localized capacity, rooted in relationships in the community, that allowed us to, with confidence, go into a public meeting, public action, knowing that we would have the turnout that we were announcing to the media that we would have, and announcing to the public officials that we would have. So there would be announcements within congregations as well on the weekends prior to the public action. Sometimes buses would be, or vans would be organized to get folks, they would meet up at their particular house of worship and then be transported over to the site of the action. So that's how we did it.
No, thank you.
We were not doing radio ads or, leafleting the neighborhood, hoping that people would hear it and respond, because we found that that's not reliable, and people don't feel a connection to whatever the issue might be. It's the fact that you came and talked to me and I told you about this issue and its impact on me and my family. And you asked me, what are you prepared to do about it? And then you came back and you told me there's going to be a public meeting. I feel this commitment to show up now and to be part of making a change happen.
We have a history in Rochester of doing exactly what you said. We didn't quite get the numbers that you got, but we did it and we are proud of it. I believe, Barbara, correct me if I'm wrong, in 2017, in November, we had 3 issues that everyone on this call would say are the issues to work on. And we had testimonies that were very, very moving, given by each of those issues, and elected officials prepared to respond, and we held them accountable. Barbara, do you remember what the issues were? I remember one was Verna Weir and her husband, who'd been pushed around on a corner in a wheelchair by police. So police brutality must have been one of the issues. Barbara, what were the other 2? Do you remember?
Well, I think that was in conjunction with some of the actions we had underway. The child care subsidy was one of them.
Okay.
And we had a postcard campaign related to that.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not sure if possibly wage.
Must have been.
Raise the wage, possibly. And that, it was in 2017. We had 500 people at that meeting.
So that's good.
And that was organized in this manner in which you described it. Each congregation committed a certain attendance to that meeting. And we did have a little debacle there that caused a reduction in participation. But we gave the microphone to someone who had not committed to give it back.
Yes.
So,
But
so
it was
there,
still a-
there was an
still a
intervention.
successful.
Our organizer, Betty intervened there.
It was still a
courageously.
highly successful
It was
act.
still a highly successful meeting. And
Yes.
yes, and the legislators were there to we did the ask, and they did support. I think our city council president was there as well. And that was the last public action meeting that we had.
That's great. Yeah, one of our organizing lessons that we've learned through the years is to always have 2 microphones just for that situation.
Maybe hold it for them.
That's good. On a stand. Yes. Yeah, that's great. So you have in your DNA some of this experience, which is exciting. And I think the 2 critical things. Well, I'll say a couple of things. Organizing teams at a local level is, in my experience, the most important factor in building something that is durable, that's sustainable, and that grows over time. And you actually, as I said, come out stronger for the next fight. And so we came out of this action with 800 people, ended up in a meeting a couple of years later with the governor, 2,000 people in this big church, and won his support for state legislation that would pump millions of dollars in new state funds into the city, including money for home repairs, the Camden Home Improvement Program. So we went out and organized to identify 300 families who needed forgivable loans of up to $20,000 to fix basic systems within their home, heating, electrical, et cetera, plumbing. And so 300 homeowners were able to get work done on their properties as part of this infusion of state resources into Camden. And then the nonprofit housing groups also got millions of dollars to create new home ownership possibilities. So I just want to say, it's, I know that RockX has not had an organizer for a little while. And I believe that you're moving toward that. And I think that's really exciting. I do think that is a difference maker if you have an organizer who's accompanying the process within all of your various institutions and helping to shore up, to solidify the formation of teams and the kind of the implementation of the organizing cycle within all of your congregations. The other thing I'll add is the role of faith leaders within this. I think it's really critical. I think of it in 2 ways. There's an internal role that a faith leader plays, congregational leader, which is to do that work inside of the congregation of preaching and teaching about making that connection that we were talking about earlier with Rabbi Stein between our faith tradition and this work in the public sphere. Preaching and teaching, equipping your people to make that connection. Also helping to identify and to proposition, we say, to invite folks who might have some leadership, some untapped leadership potential to become part of the organizing team within your particular faith community. And then to accompany that team when and as you are able through that organizing cycle, and to celebrate, lift up the work of that organizing team within the broader life of the congregation in public kinds of ways. And I think externally, there's work that a faith leader can do both in these public actions as far as offering faith reflections or doing this work of moral narrative that we talk about. What's the story that we're going to tell through a faith lens about what's happening and why there needs to be action to resolve it. And I think a faith leader can also recruit their peers into the work, peers within their own faith tradition, and then colleagues from other faith traditions as well. I have worked with some really clear faith leaders who wanted to build power, to make change, and they were able to engage through one-to-ones a circle of other faith leaders that they brought into the organizing process. I want to see you all at the same time. So how are you feeling? Are you feeling, how's your spirit right now?
I think your talk was very helpful in refreshing some of the enthusiasm about the organizing process and the potential. And Reverend Wilkinson suggested a reading to us at the last board meeting, Urban Alchemy, Restoring America's Sorted Out Cities by Mindy Thompson Fullilove. And I started reading that, and it gives a background that I've never looked at before. And I've always wondered why in Rochester is the city not council and really the county legislator developing a plan. I have 24 years in the Army, and you have an issue, you develop a plan, you work the plan, you see how it's going, and you get a result. But it just seems as if we're wallowing in argument, and we're not focusing on what to do instead of what are we fighting. The whole thing, the Police Accountability Board, everybody voted on all of that. But it's the work at the neighborhood that is going to make a difference when people in the neighborhood become interested. And another book, Bleeding Out, was an excellent book on gun violence. And that identified focusing on a specific neighborhood, a specific group of people, not worded as gangs, but just group of people within the gangs, maybe 5 people who are terrorizing the other people in the gang and terrorizing the neighborhood so that no one feels comfortable going outside of the house. So I took the book down to Father the center. Yes, the center on North Clinton, because that's our big gun violence area, and gave one of them, they have a volunteer who's a police officer, and then the organizer or the executive director there. Just because reading those things gives an option or a thought of what you can do yourself. The PAB is a political issue. They're all going to be, they're fighting. It's this top, they're just in kind of a gridlock, the normal political, and I have to say, largely white male gridlock of why we won't support it, why the police won't. I mean, accountability should not be a controversial word, and it is. But the people in the neighborhood can get together and do things, outreach, whatever. And I remember an LA community doing that. It was they won an award at the social ministry gathering in Washington, D.C. that they have, the Catholics have it every February. It was very, very impressive. This group of Latino women went out into the streets. They got t-shirts, they went out into the streets as the result after an 8-year-old child had been gunned down in crossfire. And they made it happen. They turned their community around by approaching the police on their street. Help us and let's develop a relationship. And they got involved. And that's what we're talking about. And it's not a difficult thing. It's just getting to the people and making them believe that they can turn it around. And it is exciting.
That parish is part of Faith in Action Federation in LA called LA Voice, Dolores Mission Parish.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. So thank you. I can hear the gears turning within you. So I'm really happy to hear that. I'd love to hear from 3 other folks before we wrap up. How is your spirit right now? Dormant is not an option.
Speak here. I'm going to speak here, and I'm sort of speaking on behalf of just looking at us as the group, and something that was said there triggered this whole thought for me, and that is, one of the things that we're dealing with is primarily we've got the city of Rochester and we've got the county, and they're 2 different scenarios and very different issues. And if we're looking at, and if we're really concerned with what's going on in the city, and we want to organize around that, what I'm looking at on the screen is totally wrong. It should be at least 50 to 60% black and brown. Now, how do we got to go about doing that? I'm not sure. We've got to figure out how to reach out to them, in a way that we hear what their concerns are, because ours aren't going to be a lot of the same ones that theirs are. And I think for all of us, that's one of the things that we've got to think about in terms of how we want to move forward. These issues are there. They're hard to get at. You have a constant turnover in the political people in the county and in the city. We just had GRCC just had a session about two weeks ago where we had Adam Bello and Malik Evans speak on how they wanted to be able to work together. And it was a very positive meeting. We had a small group there, but we also had a group online, and we're doing some follow-up on it now. And one of my pieces here, I mean, I've been involved with RockX on one level or another ever since it was formed. And it was formed from 3 people out of the GRCC board, Reverend Wilkinson, Marv Mitch, and Reverend Gordon Webster. So I was involved in all of that. And I like the work that you do. And I want to figure out some ways in which we can work together and we can mobilize groups of people together. But when I'm looking at here and I'm thinking about like what happened in Camden and what could happen here in Rochester, we've got to figure out how to make the board that I'm looking at right here more multicultural.
Thank you, Alan. And what I would just add based on that is that in Camden, this organizing story I was sharing was the work was being led by congregations who were deeply impacted by the issues. And in some cases, it was congregations whose members came from outside, but who put a lot of time and energy into making connections with their neighbors around them and did relational outreach one-to-ones with folks in the community and invited them into their organizing team. And then there was another set of congregations in the suburbs who were solidarity partners and who used some of their political influence and resources to help lean on certain elected officials in ways that were really helpful. They encouraged them. They didn't lean on them. I misspoke. 2 other folks, how is your spirit? 1 minute apiece, please. Rebecca and Pastor Doug, I'm going to call on you too, if you don't mind.
My spirit is a bit conflicted. I'm hopeful and encouraged, but I'm also overwhelmed. And to Alan's point, my struggle in all of this is that I feel like, yeah, I'm a pastor here in the city, but my congregation is very much metropolitan. Most of our folks come in from the suburbs, and they're here for a reason, and they want to get to work in the city. But I struggle because I don't want to be the white liberal do-gooder that I am. coming in and assuming that I have answers, and I somehow have to figure out how to engage in a great listening with allies, with folks around who are in the midst of the struggles. I don't know how to do that.
Just real quick, I really appreciate your honesty and transparency. We had a primarily suburban membership congregation in South Camden who made a commitment to do some one-to-ones. They had connections with folks from the neighborhood through their school and through various ministries that they had. And so they formed a kind of a joint organizing team, suburban folks, city folks, and they launched a listening campaign together and went out 2 by 2 into the community, knocking on doors, listening. And there was no imposition of anything happening on folks in the neighborhood. It was an invitation to share. And at the end of the listening campaign, everybody that had been visited was invited to a meal where they were able to talk together about some of the themes that had emerged and their impact. And it was a very powerful evening.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. That's great to hear.
Very helpful.
Joe, can you hear me? This is William
Who?
Wilkinson. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
It's good to have you here. Sorry, I was a little bit late. My wife had a health concern, and we just came home from the doctor. There's really an important thing that you raised that I think can really help us in Rochester Acts. You talked about the local organizing teams. And one of the things that we've been struggling with is to become more clear that the social justice team of a church is not the local organizing team. It may be very important to that localized organizing team, but it's that team working with other community organizations in 2 places. One is the community around your faith community's home, and the other is in your hometown. That is to say, in many of our suburban areas, we have a Rock Acts member organization, but we also have members from other Rock Acts churches living in that community. And so one of the next steps for us, I believe, is to build our local organizing team with our congregational team, but not defined by our congregational team. And just to go back to that incident that people talked about in 2017 at that public action, one of the problems at that time was that we hadn't had the one-to-ones with some of the folks that we invited to participate. So the person who, for instance, had the mic that day and they had to try to get the mic back. Since then, we've built a relationship with that person. He's ill now, but we actually have that person ready to come onto the board. But we did agree that the social justice organization of UCLM and our Justice Task Force could actually have a united organizing team. And so it's building those relationships with other folks that are already active that really is one of our growing edges. We've been talking about, for instance, getting together with the Black Baptist organization, the Black Baptist Ministers Council, and having some joint work with them. And so there are other things that are really opportunities, which mean we are not the organizers, but our local organizing relationships teams. That's doing the organizing. That'll help us to not just have a public action, but to have the growing infrastructure of people working together beyond the public action for the next possible public action.
Amen. Really well said, Reverend Wilkinson. Yeah, you can adapt, you can be creative, you can find the particular version of all of this that works best for you in your context. Just, being clear about some of the principles, some of the thinking underneath of it. I'm going to turn it back in a moment to Denny and or Reverend Wilkinson for any next steps. But Rebecca, we had skipped over you, and I just wanted to give you a chance to share how your spirit is if you wanted to.
Well, I don't know that you skipped over me since you never mind. Since it's an enforced response. I echo some of Doug's feelings about being overwhelmed, some of which are for the same reasons, because I am in a congregation that is a city congregation, but has a largely suburban community, although there are some very, very wonderful, invested, committed individuals in that community, but also just coming from a personal perspective, which is that I have been one of the pastors of this church for 10.5 months. So I am still at the very beginning of building relationships just in my own church, as well as feeling a deep commitment to building relationships in the community. The good news is that Rochester is also a pretty small city, not quite as small as Camden. But I was in Philadelphia before I came here and familiar with power and know much more about how the complexity of working in a larger community, that there's I feel like there's a capacity here to make meaningful change given the size of this community and the number of committed individuals. But I've still got a lot of personal relationships to build, and this could very much be part of that, even as I continue to build those, you know, as an individual and as the pastor of this church. So there's a sense of there's an awful lot on my plate. I'm just coming into my first just finishing up my first generosity season, heading into my first Advent season here. So I'm still learning about the community, both my own faith community and the community at large. And this feels like a really big bite to chomp off at once. And yet I'm also very encouraged and committed to the idea that we don't do this alone. And so I want to be a part of the group that's doing it together.
Thank you. And thank you, everybody. It's been fun to spend this time with you. And I wish you well as you move forward. And I will now turn it over to one of our co-chairs.
Joe, before you leave, I just want to underscore for Rebecca and the other folks who are here, we're having a Rock Acts training on November 28th, 29th, and 30th. That's going to be 9 to 5 at the Downtown United Presbyterian Church. And this is going to be a wonderful opportunity for all of us, regardless of whether we're pastors, other religious leaders in the congregations, or in member organizations, to get together and join and be trained together with all the conversations that go with that. So I think that's a wonderful next step that I invite the members of the Religious Leaders Caucus to be participant in as well.
Fantastic.
Joe, I want to thank you for the personal stories that you told of actually what happened in Camden. It's very motivational. I know that what Rebecca said about only being pastor here for 10.5 months, we've had an enormous turnover in the last year of congregational leadership. And so I just want to take your words of encouragement about having one-on-ones very seriously. Not only do we need to connect with these new folks as well as seasoned pastors, but with listening to their concerns. It's beneficial no matter where it leads. We just need to be in touch in order to support one another, in order to hear what is happening, and in order to be able to even begin to strategize on how to address any of these needs. The challenge. And I really, really appreciate your being with us today, because I know your wife has COVID and your sister-in-law has recently died. And this is a terrible burden to carry on your shoulders in just when this is all happening in your family. So I greatly appreciate your being with us. And we'll be in touch some more. Now Brittany is with us and has an update on Interfaith Children's Weekend this coming weekend. I want to
Yes,
give you a
excited.
good news story, Brittany.
Awesome.
I emailed a pastor who had said no to the callers from Children's Agenda, that he was not going to do Children's Sabbath. And I emailed him as if I didn't hear that report. A liturgy full borne out with loads of prayers about children's needs, and sent it to another, a sister of St. Joseph, who sent that same liturgy to another pastor who is doing it. So, you know, you just do it, you pass the word, and sometimes something happens. Sometimes.
Absolutely.
So, Brittany, give us your golden news about this weekend.
Awesome. So, hi everyone. My name is Brittany Reed. I think that some of you might have gotten some emails from me recently about Interfaith Weekend if you're on our mailing list or participated in the past. I'm new to the Children's Agenda. I am their advocacy coordinator, and I started over the summer. And this year I'm working closely with Bridget Hurley to do some work for Children's Interfaith Weekend. This year, we're celebrating the weekend, this weekend, October 21st through the 23rd. But we know that we're connected to some congregations and communities that have already been sharing the petition and holding their own events to celebrate children. So we appreciate that as well. And we're encouraging people to share the petition for this year's issue all the way up until like Thanksgiving almost. So there's definitely time still to participate even after this weekend is over. So this weekend's events and this year's issue are centered around solutions, not suspensions, which is and removing suspensions or placing a suspension ban, except for in the most extreme cases, for young children specifically is our focus this year. Last night, we actually hosted a teach-in about the issue and got to share some of our recent research and report findings. And so we are marshaling our efforts and advocating for the governor to sign that. This year, we're going to be having a circle of intention on Sunday morning, the 23rd from 8 to 8:30 a.m. And I saw him earlier on here. Reverend Ted Polano is going to help us with that. He's been working with Bridget to coordinate, and he's going to help us lead prayer and things along those lines. So I'd be more than happy to share information with you all about the issue, our petition, and fact sheets and everything like that, so that you all can share them as well if you're interested. And of course, we hope to see you on Sunday if you can make it on Sunday morning to spend a few moments with us.
Thank you, Brittany. I will be there from 8 until 8:30, which is the time frame, and that's manageable for many people's worship schedule. And so glad that Ted will be leading that prayer service for our vulnerable Rochester City School District children. The address of the headquarters where this prayer service will be is 130 Broad Street. And we've had a good crowd the last couple of years there doing that. And other times we've supported Rochester City School District, where when Citizens Action presented Pat Stone and Gandhi Institute and Raise and Roar and several other inspiring speakers on the needs of Rochester City School District children. That was September 3rd. And then other times we were focusing on mental health and always working with Children's Agenda. We really appreciate what you do. You're not only a great help to the city, but to we who want to be of assistance. Muhammad, good to see you. Sorry I didn't welcome you when you first joined. Have you a word to say about today's issues, concerns gathering? You're muted.
You're still on mute.
Can you unmute your?
No, I'm sorry. Yeah, thank you very much. It's inspiring discussion. Very good for us to think about future, how we can really motivate Rochester faith communities to be more active and Rocket. Just thinking about ourselves, so busy in our life running here and there. I thought how we can recruit some new people to make it more impactful. So sorry for that. I'm I did not participate in some of the meetings because I was overseas, and then other things. My life has been too much, I think, too many activities in my life. So thank you very much for organizing it. Thank you for all of your energy, and to the rest of the community leadership who are present here and who may not be here. Hopefully we see everybody next time.
Thanks, Muhammad. Just a word about the formation of local community organizations. I know that Third Presbyterian is very well represented on this call, and they have very active anti-racism efforts. I do know of one congregation that had at their last local organizing community meeting at their congregation, Kim Byers, who is ROCAC's Voting Rights Task Force Chair. She gave an inspiring talk, and she's recruited 4 people from that community, 11 from another, to join the already very active, successful activity of the Voting Rights Task Force. And that same community that hosted Kim last month will host ROCAC's Justice Systems Task Force Chair this Monday, and the Climate Justice Task Force Chair a month from Monday. So these are some of the ways to nurture the people that might become your local organizing committees. Have you any other suggestions that you want to bless us with before we close?
You know, the Islamic Center of the Muslim Civic Engagement Committee is inviting all Democrats and Republican candidates on Saturday, which is the 22nd at 2 p.m. First would be Democrats at 2 p.m., followed by Republicans at 3 p.m. on the questions which we are facing today. So everybody is welcome if the leadership can communicate to their community. So it's open for everybody to come and ask questions and listen to what they're thinking about our issues.
So Republicans and Democrat candidates?
Yes.
Okay, at 2 o'clock and 3 o'clock at the Islamic Center?
That's right.
This Saturday.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's good news. There are a listing of other important events, such as the End Hate Conference, at the bottom of the September minutes that are attached to this agenda. If you want to click that, you'll see a layout of really important things that your congregation members will want to attend. And now I wonder if we can have Roberta Davis give us a closing prayer.
Speaking once again in Uname Lenape. Oh, Kwasit Kishalamieng, beloved Creator. Kehelawanishi nulelindam tilichkaski nipayakpin yukoenda kishkwik. Truly, I am thankful and glad that I can stand here on this day. Getamaktune, I talk humbly. Tamake leminen, have pity on us. Kanakihinen, watch over us. Katalapem wasihana, we want to be useful. Wichaminen tilichgaski wili nipalinen, ok wili apanskanen. Help us so that we can stand up well and walk around well. Watenen mainen kinamawakan wila ma weokan ok wilangan dewakan. Accept from us thankfulness, honesty, and peace. Wanishi kishalamiang elemelinen wemi keku. We are grateful, Creator, because you give us everything. Yuho.
Thank you, Roberta. Thank you again, Joe, for, I don't see you here anymore, but we are very grateful that Joe Fleming blessed us with his presence, his stories, and his empowering message. Let's empower one another to do some one-and-ones and really listen to what's on people's hearts and minds so that we can better work together to address some of these needs. and empower the potential leaders in our congregations to develop into local organizing committees that really do listen not only to each other and to our faith traditions message, but to their neighbors. So have a great month and stay in touch, do one-on-ones with one another too. And God bless. See you in a month. Email me with